I hit the cold marble floor so hard it knocked the air from my lungs. My father's fist was tangled in my hair, yanking my head back as 200 wedding guests watched in stunned silence. The music had stopped. The laughter was gone. Every eye in the ballroom was fixed on me. Just a few feet away stood my sister in her flawless white wedding gown, clutching the bouquet that should have been the happiest part of her day. Instead, she watched without moving while my father screamed inches from my face. Camera flashes exploded across the room, capturing every second of my humiliation. The pain was unbearable. The betrayal was worse. As tears blurred my vision and whispers spread through the crowd, something inside me suddenly went cold. Not fear, not sadness, clarity. Because at that exact moment, lying on the ballroom floor with my family's cruelty on full display, I realized something they never had. They thought they were destroying me. They had no idea they were witnessing the beginning of their own downfall. My name is Elena. For 30 years, I lived under a roof where my voice carried less weight than the dust settling on the living room furniture. We lived in a beautiful, sprawling suburban house in New Jersey, a home that looked picture perfect from the outside, with its manicured lawn and wraparound porch. But inside those walls, the climate was dictated entirely by who you were born as. I was the firstborn, the responsible one, the daughter who was expected to be a pillar of unyielding support without ever needing support in return. My younger sister, Chloe, was the golden child. In our family, there was an unwritten, unspoken rule that everyone implicitly understood. Chloe's happiness was the family's ultimate priority, and my role was simply to facilitate it. If Chloe was smiling, the house was warm. If Chloe was upset, the entire household went into a state of frantic emergency until her demands were met. My parents, Thomas and Clara, didn't just love her more, they worshipped her. Every single whim that crossed Chloe's mind was treated like a royal decree. If she wanted the last slice of cake, it was hers, even if it was my birthday. If she wanted to watch a specific television show, the remote was handed over without a second thought. Everything she said was listened to with rapt attention, while my achievements were treated like minor, expected chores. I remember graduating from college with honors, holding a degree in data analysis that I had sweated blood to earn. When I handed my diploma to my father, he didn't even look up from his tablet. He just muttered, "Good, now you can start paying for your own groceries," and went back to reading. But when Chloe passed a remedial high school art class, my mother threw a massive backyard barbecue, inviting 40 people to celebrate our little genius. That was the baseline of my existence. I became an invisible ghost in my own home. I learned to walk softly, speak quietly, and ask for absolutely nothing. I channeled all my pain into my work. I became a successful data analyst, spending long, grueling hours staring at spreadsheets and glowing monitors. I paid my own bills, contributed significantly to the household expenses, and quietly kept the peace. I mistakenly believed that if I was useful enough, if I was independent enough to never be a burden, they would eventually look at me and see value. I didn't realize that to a pair of narcissistic parents, an independent, quiet child isn't someone to respect. It's just someone they can exploit without resistance. I stayed in that house far longer than I should have, saving every penny, completely unaware that my silent compliance was setting a trap. I was filling a reservoir of resentment that was bound to burst, and the catalyst for that explosion was already being planned in the living room right next to mine. To understand why I broke the way I did on the day of the wedding, you have to understand the sheer weight of what I had already given up for Chloe. My parents didn't just ask me to step aside for her, they actively stripped away my hard work to pave her path, and I let them do it because I was conditioned to believe that family came before everything else. The first major betrayal happened when I was 22. I had spent my entire college career working 2 jobs, one at a campus library making minimum wage and another doing late-night data entry for a local logistics company. I barely slept, surviving on black coffee and adrenaline, all so I could build a financial cushion for my future. By the time graduation approached, I had saved exactly $15,000. It was my freedom fund, the money that was supposed to get me my own apartment and out from under my parents' suffocating roof. One evening, I came downstairs to find Thomas and Clara sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of brochures for an elite, out-of-state art institute that Chloe wanted to attend. "Elena," my father had said, not looking me in the eye but rather focusing on a calculator. "Chloe needs to secure her housing deposit and tuition down payment by Friday. We're short. We saw your savings account statement in the mail. We're going to use your $15,000. It's a family loan. We'll pay you back before the year ends." I opened my mouth to protest, to tell them that money was my blood and sweat, but my mother immediately cut me off, her eyes cold. "Don't be selfish, Elena. Your sister has a real talent. You already have a degree. Why are you hoarding money when your family needs you?" They took the money. I never saw a single dime of that $15,000 again. Whenever I brought it up over the next few years, I was met with gaslighting, told that I was greedy and that a good sister wouldn't count pennies when it came to her siblings' future. A few years later, history repeated itself in a more petty, venomous way. I had purchased a high-end laptop, a necessity for my data analysis contracts, which cost me nearly $2,000. One afternoon, I came home from a long day at the office to find my desk completely empty. When I confronted my mother, she shrugged casually. "Chloe wrecked her car last week and needs cash for the insurance deductible. I sold your laptop to our neighbor, Mr. Henderson. You're older, Elena. You have a steady salary now. You can just buy another one. Stop making a scene." I swallowed the bitter taste of resentment yet again. I bought a new laptop, dug my heels into my work, and began saving under a completely private bank account they couldn't touch. I hid my financial statements, changed my passwords, and kept my head down. My ultimate pride and joy, the only tangible symbol of my years of grueling overtime and silent endurance, was my dark green Ford Explorer BMW. It was a beautiful, powerful machine, and I had saved up for over 3 years to buy it. I didn't lease it. I didn't take a massive loan. I paid off every single cent of the $42,000 price tag with my own sweat, working 80-hour weeks until my eyes blurred. When it was finally delivered to our driveway, it felt like my ticket out of that house. It was mine, entirely mine. Little did I know, the moment my parents and Chloe looked out the window at that shiny green vehicle, they didn't see my success. They saw a brand new asset to be consumed by the golden child. The trap was formally set exactly 3 weeks before Chloe's wedding. Her upcoming marriage to Julian was all my parents could talk about. Julian came from an incredibly wealthy, old-money family in the area, people who ran in elite social circles and valued public reputation above everything else. My parents were utterly obsessed with looking like they belonged to that same upper-class world. Everything had to be perfect, opulent, and grand. One evening, after a grueling 10-hour shift of analyzing datasets, I walked into the kitchen to grab a glass of water. I immediately felt the shift in the air. Thomas and Clara were waiting for me, sitting side by side at the kitchen island, while Chloe stood behind them, sipping an iced coffee with a smug, expectant look on her face. "Elena, sit down for a moment," my father said, adjusting his glasses and putting on a rare, manufactured smile that immediately made my guard go up. "I'm really tired, Dad. Can it wait?" I replied, holding my glass. "No, it can't," my mother chimed in, her voice dripping with that forced sweetness she only used when she wanted something from me. "Your sister's wedding is just 3 weeks away, and there is so much left to do. Julian's family is hosting multiple pre-wedding dinners, and Chloe needs to run around for final dress fittings, flower arrangements, and heavy shopping trips with her bridesmaids. Her little coupe isn't big enough to haul all those gowns and boxes." My father cleared his throat, leaning forward. "We need you to hand over the keys to your Ford Explorer for the next month. Chloe and her friends need a reliable, spacious vehicle to drive around so our family looks respectable. You can just take the train or ride shares to work for a few weeks. It's the least you can do to support your sister for her big day." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "You want me to give Chloe my car? For a whole month? I work 80 hours a week, Dad. I need my BMW to get to my client meetings. It's my property." Instantly, the forced sweetness vanished from my mother's face, replaced by a harsh glare. "There you go again, being entirely selfish. It's just a temporary loan, Elena. Are you really going to ruin your sister's wedding preparations over a car? We are a family, and we are supposed to help each other." Chloe sighed loudly, rolling her eyes. Forget it, Mom. I knew she'd be bitter about me getting married first. She just wants to ruin my special month. The emotional blackmail was suffocating. I stood there, looking at the three of them, exhausted and desperately wanting to avoid an explosive, weeks-long screaming match in the house right before the wedding. I swallowed my resentment, pulled my keys out of my bag, and slammed them onto the counter. Fine, I said strictly. It is a temporary loan, just for the wedding errands. I want it back with a full tank of gas the day after the reception. Chloe snatched the keys off the counter with a triumphant smirk, not even uttering a thank you. I walked up to my room in the dark, feeling exploited yet again, but telling myself it would all be over soon. I had no idea that handing over those keys was exactly what they wanted, and that they had already planned to use my silence to pull off the ultimate public theft. The day of the wedding arrived, and the venue was nothing short of breathtaking. My parents had spared absolutely no expense, utilizing every ounce of credit they could secure to impress Julian's aristocratic family. The grand ballroom was adorned with thousands of cascading white roses, silk drapes that caught the warm light of crystal chandeliers, and a massive, elevated stage under a floral arch. I arrived alone, wearing a dark green lace dress, a color I chose because it felt grounded, a stark contrast to the sea of pastels and white. I took a seat near the back of the room, content to be a quiet spectator, waiting for this entire ordeal to finally end so I could get my keys back and reclaim my life. The ceremony was flawless, and the reception quickly shifted into a grand celebration. Waiters moved seamlessly through the 200 guests, pouring expensive champagne, while Julian's parents sat at the head table, looking poised and thoroughly impressed by the apparent wealth of our family. Chloe looked radiant in her designer gown, her face glowing with the absolute satisfaction of being the undisputed center of the universe. Then, the music quieted down. My father, Thomas, stood up from the main table, adjusting his tuxedo jacket with an air of immense self-importance. He walked over to the center stage and took the microphone from the stand. The room went dead silent, all eyes turning toward him. "Ladies and gentlemen, family and distinguished guests," Thomas began, his voice booming proudly through the high-end sound system. He paused, looking directly at Julian's parents with a theatrical, calculated smile. "Today is a day of joining not just two beautiful people, but two families who believe in generosity, legacy, and love. We all know how much my beautiful daughter Chloe means to us. But a wedding is also a time for grand gestures from those who love her most." He turned his gaze toward the back of the room, locking eyes with me. A cold shiver ran down my spine as a sickening sense of dread began to pool in my stomach. "My eldest daughter, Elena," Thomas announced into the microphone, pointing a finger directly at me, causing 200 heads to turn in my direction. Elena wanted to make sure her little sister started her new journey in absolute luxury and style. So, as a grand surprise gesture of sisterly devotion, Elena has decided to officially sign over the title and gift her brand new $42,000 Ford Explorer BMW to Chloe as a permanent wedding present. The crowd erupted into collective gasps of admiration and polite, thunderous applause. Across the room, Chloe smirked triumphantly from the head table, holding up my spare set of keys for everyone to see, while Julian's mother nodded approvingly at the sheer scale of the gift. I sat there, completely frozen, the sound of the clapping hands ringing like a deafening roar in my ears. They hadn't just borrowed my car, they had staged a public ambush. They knew that in front of 200 wealthy guests, in front of Chloe's new old-money in-laws, the societal pressure to smile, nod, and play along would be too immense for anyone to resist. They counted on my 30 years of silence. They thought I would swallow a $42,000 theft just to protect my father's fragile ego and my sister's big day. But 30 years of being invisible suddenly crystallized into a hard, unbreakable wall of pure defiance. The applause was still echoing when I pushed my chair back. The heavy metal legs scraped loudly against the polished marble floor, cutting through the clapping. I stood up straight, my heart pounding like a war drum, but my voice entirely steady. "I did not gift my car," I said, my voice cutting through the fading applause, carrying clearly across the silent room. Thomas frozen on stage, the smile instantly hardening on his face. He lowered the microphone slightly, his eyes flashing with a dangerous warning glare. "Elena, sweetheart, sit down. You're getting emotional." "I am not sitting down, and I am not your sweetheart," I countered, raising my voice so every single person in that room could hear me. "I never gifted my vehicle. My parents took my keys under false pretenses 3 weeks ago, claiming it was a temporary loan for shopping. This is a public ambush, and it is a theft. I refuse to hand over my hard-earned property to fund my sister's greed or my father's lies." The silence that followed was suffocating. The applause curdled into absolute, stunned horror. The carefully constructed mask of the perfect upper-class family had just been violently ripped away in front of everyone they wanted to impress. The silence in the grand ballroom was deafening, a thick, suffocating shock that paralyzed every guest in attendance. My father stood on the elevated stage, his face rapidly turning a dark, dangerous shade of purple. His carefully manicured public persona had just been utterly demolished by the daughter he spent 30 years ignoring. For a split second, nobody moved. Then, Thomas dropped the microphone. The heavy metal clattered against the stage floor, sending a sharp, painful screech of feedback echoing through the high-end speakers. He didn't just walk toward me, he lunged. In a blind, narcissistic rage, completely forgetting the 200 wealthy guests, the videographers, and Julian's aristocratic family, my father rushed down the steps of the stage. His eyes were wide and wild, filled with an unhinged fury that I had seen behind closed doors, but never out in the open. Before I could even step back or defend myself, he closed the distance. "You ungrateful, selfish parasite!" he roared, his voice raw and distorted with hatred. He reached out and violently grabbed a massive handful of my hair, wrenching my head backward with terrifying force. A sharp, blinding pain shot through my scalp as my balance was completely stripped away. The sudden force dragged me downward, my knees buckling instantly as I was forced onto the polished, cold marble floor. I was pinned there, on my hands and knees, my head pulled back so hard my eyes could only stare upward at his snarling, contorted face. The pristine white lace of Chloe's bridal gown was only inches away from me, completely untouched and pristine, while my own dignity was being systematically torn to shreds on the ground. A collective scream tore through the ballroom. Guests pushed their chairs back in absolute horror, women gasped, and phone cameras immediately began to flash, capturing the raw, brutal reality of the perfect family patriarch committing a violent assault in the middle of a wedding. "You will not ruin this family!" Thomas screamed right into my ear, his breath hot and fast, his fingers tightening even further into my tangled hair. "You will smile, you will give her the keys, or I swear to God, I will throw you out on the street with nothing." But as the physical pain throbbed through my head and a scream of agony tore from my throat, the fear completely vanished. It was replaced by a cold, piercing, and crystalline clarity. Looking at my father's unhinged face, I realized that the invisible chains of guilt and obligation were gone. He had just shown the entire world exactly what kind of monster he really was. The violence was brief, cut short only when a group of shocked male guests finally rushed forward, physically tackling Thomas and wrenching his hands away from my hair. The moment his grip broke, I didn't stay to cry, and I didn't yell back. I pulled myself up from the marble floor, smoothed down my torn green lace dress, and turned my back on my family. With my head held high and my heart turned to absolute stone, I walked out of the venue, leaving the chaotic ruins of their golden empire behind me. The heavy glass doors of the wedding venue slammed shut behind me, cutting off the muffled sounds of screams and shattered glass. The cool evening air hit my face, and for the first time in 30 years, I felt like I could actually breathe. My scalp was throbbing with a fierce, burning pain where my father had wrenched my hair, and my hands were trembling slightly, but I wasn't crying. The tears that had defined my childhood were completely gone, replaced by a cold, calculated, and immovable determination. I walked purposefully across the asphalt parking lot to where my Ford Explorer BMW was parked. I climbed into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror. My hair was a tangled mess, and my green dress was smudged with dust from the ballroom floor, but my eyes were sharper than they had ever been. I started the engine, the powerful roar of the machine validating the years of grueling overtime I had spent to buy it. I put the vehicle in drive and navigated away from the venue, heading straight toward the nearest police precinct. The drive was 20 minutes of absolute, eerie silence. I didn't call my mother. I didn't text Chloe. I knew exactly what they wanted. They wanted me to drive around, calm down, and eventually slide back into my role as the compliant, invisible daughter who protects the family's image at all costs. But that girl had died on the marble floor of the ballroom. When I walked into the brightly lit police station, the desk sergeant looked up, immediately noticing the red marks on my neck and my disheveled appearance. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked, pulling a notepad forward. "I want to report a grand theft auto and a violent aggravated assault," I said, my voice entirely level, devoid of any trembling emotion. For the next hour, I sat with the detective, laying out every single fact with chronological precision. I gave them the registration details of my $42,000 BMW, the text messages proving the vehicle was taken under the false pretense of a temporary loan, and a detailed statement of the public physical attack. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't need to. The raw truth was damning enough. Just as the detective was finishing the report, his computer pinged. "It looks like we won't have to look hard for witnesses," he said, turning the monitor toward me. Multiple wedding guests had already uploaded video clips of the assault to local social media groups, and several prominent attendees had called the emergency line to report the domestic violence they had just witnessed. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and completely out of my parents' control. "Do you want to press charges, Elena?" the detective asked, his pen hovering over the final line of the paperwork. I looked at the form, knowing that signing it would permanently shatter whatever was left of my biological family. I didn't hesitate for a single second. I grabbed the pen and signed my name. "Yes," I said firmly. "Press them to the absolute fullest extent of the law." The legal wheels turned with a terrifying, beautiful velocity. While I was sitting safely in the quiet warmth of a local diner sipping coffee, 2 police cruisers arrived at the wedding venue. They walked right into the grand ballroom where the reception had ground to a miserable halt. According to the statements filed later, my father was arrested in his tuxedo in front of the remaining guests, handcuffed and led out to a police car. The public nature of his violence left him absolutely no room to hide. Faced with the undeniable video evidence captured by the hired videographers and the damning testimonies of 30 prominent wedding guests who refused to perjure themselves for a dynamic abuser, Thomas's upper-class facade was permanently shattered. The prosecutor pushed hard, and my father was ultimately forced to plead guilty to aggravated assault. The judge showed no leniency, sentencing him to a heavy criminal record, a massive financial fine, and a court-mandated, multi-year anger management probation program that completely ruined his professional standing and social reputation. But the karma didn't stop with him. Julian's old money family, utterly horrified by the primitive display of violence and the toxic reality of the household their son was marrying into, officially called off the wedding that very night. They walked out of the venue, taking their son and their wealth with them. Chloe's engagement was permanently broken. Without Julian's financial backing or my steady salary to exploit, my parents' house of cards collapsed. They were forced to downsize their home and sell off assets just to pay back the massive unused wedding debt. A few days after the incident, I returned to the suburban house one last time with a formal police escort. While Clara and Chloe watched from the hallway in a silence filled with bitter, defeated resentment, I packed every single one of my belongings, my documents, and my life into boxes. I loaded everything into the back of my dark green Ford Explorer BMW, climbed into the driver's seat, and drove down the driveway without looking back. Today, I live in a beautiful, sunlit apartment 3 states away, surrounded by a completely new community of people who respect my boundaries and value my presence. The physical and emotional scars of that night have healed into a profound sense of strength. They tried to break me to uplift her, but they only ended up destroying themselves. My father faced the full weight of the Qanun, My sister learned the brutal cost of her greed, and I finally got the one thing they could never steal from me: my absolute freedom.